Hi everyone, my name is Lucas Kwong. I am a Chinese Canadian American professor of English at CUNY. If you're watching this, you're probably Asian American or a hyphenated Asian, perhaps in some other country. You might also be an Asian Christian. I just wanted to take some time to explain to you the purpose of this site because while this background behind me is fake, the website is real. And so is the problem that we're trying to address. I want to address you as Asian Christians, and then particularly address Chinese American Christians as to the purpose and methods of this site. So first, to Asians in America in general, I think most of us know it's not a great time to be Asian in America. There's been an explosion of hatred manifesting verbal and physical assaults this year related to COVID. Most of us know why. But I just want to remind you it's still going on. It might not make major headlines, but just this past week, for example, at Elk Grove in California, right, you have a suspect who spray painted racist graffiti on a Japanese restaurant. Going further back, you've got incidents of physical assault, and keep in mind this is not just in the South, in the places that stereotypically are thought of as more racist. This happened in New Jersey in March. A woman was terrorized by a man. Perhaps one of the most terrifying and vicious incidents was a stabbing in Texas of three. This is Chinese Americans, but in fact they were Burmese, including a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. So it's still going on, and it's still a problem. And as the pandemic wears on, we know that this is not necessarily going to go away. People know as well that it is unquestionably politicians who are driving the stigmatization. The research is very clear that people don't just start doing hate crimes out of nowhere. Someone has to influence them, and more often than not, the influencer in question is a politician. Now, of course, you have your Tucker Carlsons, you have your Sean Hannitys, but they exist in a symbiotic relationship with the politicians, and a recent study by the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Lab of anti-Chinese tweets this year says the thing we can prove pretty consistently is that politicians are the main amplifiers of anti-Chinese rhetoric. This is what drives stigmatization. So again, most of us know this as Asians. We know that these hate crimes are happening. We know that politicians don't care about their careless words, and so they're either using racist rhetoric because it earns them cred with their base, or because they're genuinely racist. But the upshot is, whichever way, it increases the risk of hate crimes. Now, there have been many efforts to combat this, right? So we got to give a shout out to Stop AAP I Hate. There also recently was a picture book published looking at anti-Asian racism, talking about how we have internalized perhaps a model minority myth that encourages us to prioritize others at the cost of self. So there's already important work being done, but I want to focus in this project specifically on those of you who identify with Christ. And the reason is, to a person, all of the major politicians in America who are driving anti-Chinese rhetoric, these people all jump on the same bills. So it's not just in their tweets, but it's also in their attempted legislation to deny visas to Chinese students on very spurious grounds, to basically attribute financial and legal culpability to China for the outbreak. To a person, all of them identify with some form of Christianity. It could be Methodism, Catholicism, your basic evangelical Protestantism, but they are doing what they are doing not in spite of, but because of their identification with Christianity, and not just with Christianity, but with a specific type of Christianity. I'm talking about Christian nationalism. You might have heard of this term before. It's been popularized this year. We're talking a lot about it. Christian nationalism is basically an ideology that idealizes and advocates a fusion of American civic life with a particular type of Christian identity and culture. And we all, I think, grasp this intuitively, that in contrast to the Bible's vision of a body a mystical body from every tribe, nation, and tongue. What we have in America right now is an explicitly nationalist version of Christianity that marries the cross and the flag, and insists that there is only one way to be Christian, which implicitly, if not explicitly, is being white and conservative. So all of these people are professing Christians, but when you look at the sum total of their legislative activity, their tweets, their expressions of piety, they are pushing for a specific form of Christianity. And today, what that looks like is driving or propagating this existential conflict between a quote-unquote godless communist China and a quote-unquote God-fearing United States. So they're working in the name of Christ, the same religion that you practice in, we used to be in church, but perhaps virtually in virtual church on Sunday. They are doing this in the name of what, now I'm speaking to Christians specifically, you and I consider most sacred. So the question is, what do you do about it? What are we going to do about it? Now, I know that perhaps because of a variety of reasons, on one hand, be internalized in the model minority myth, and it could also, on the other hand, be a certain view of forgiveness and love that says, well, haters are going to hate, so love your enemies means, not participating in quote-unquote cancel culture, not participating in quote-unquote the outrage machine or the woke mob, and showing a more excellent way, in the words of 1 Corinthians 13, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to reduce harm. It's not going to lead the people who are driving this rhetoric to repentance. It's simply going to let a bad situation get worse. Because who's not stopping to think about loving their enemies by being quiet is people like Representative Dan Crenshaw. During a week when Stop AAPI Hate counted 650 reported incidents of anti-Asian discrimination, he dismissed concerns about the phrase Wuhan virus as CCP propaganda in a Fox News editorial. Did he ever apologize? No. In fact, more recently than that, he, like many other GOP politicians, tweeted that China lied about the virus. So attributing dishonesty to an entire country, billions of people. And yes, there was dishonesty amongst some officials, but the fact that he refrained from commenting on Trump's own well-documented lies sends the message only China is at fault. What do we call that? There's a simple term for that. It's racism. And you got to remember that people like him, they don't just happen to be Christian. They don't just sort of say once, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I try to keep that stuff under wraps. People like him, they talk to CBN about God giving him strength to believe the impossible. They perform piety. They perform Christianity. And when that is put together with xenophobic, anti-Chinese rhetoric, what they send is the message is that it is Christian to be anti-Chinese. It is Christian to not care about the ramifications of your words, particularly if those words disproportionately affect Asian people in America. That's the message that he's sending. That's the message that all these people are sending. So what I've done is create a fourfold letter. Part 1 introduces the statement of purpose. It explains what Christian nationalism is. It explains why it's important to combat it. It explains why we need to specifically call politicians and their supporting churches to account. Then Part 2 lists these politicians and their associated churches. Part 3 analyzes what we find to make the case that it's not enough to call out the politicians. You have to call out the churches as well. And then we make demands, and the demands involve calling for repentance from both the politicians and their associated churches. And again, this is not cancel culture. This is not cancel culture. This is loving our neighbors, not only the oppressor, but also the Burmese family who was stabbed. Also, our Buddhist loved ones who have had Jesus spray painted on their temples this year. That's what love is. And I want to say something finally to those of you who are specifically Chinese American and grew up in church hearing stories of the persecuted church in communist China, quote-unquote communist China. Perhaps felt like constantly you are between two worlds and are unsure of what to make of geopolitics. You know, at Christmas we celebrate a distinction between two visions of the world. Luke 2:1 talks about the census, right? That Caesar passed, and it says that a decree went out to register all the world, and the word for world is oikoumenen. That means all the Roman world. So that's one vision of peace, which is to register and keep people under control in the name of one particular polity, the Roman Empire. And in contrast to that, a few verses later, the angels show up, and what do they sing? Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men. And unlike oikoumenen, what we have here is ges, which refers not to the empire, but to the entire physical realm. Jesus is not interested in bringing wholeness to simply one country at the expense of another, whether it's to China at the expense of America or to America at the expense of China. He's bringing wholeness to the entire physical realm, which includes all the billions of people who share this planet. So I urge you to meditate on that and think about that, what that means for our allegiance. Although we are Chinese and American, our allegiance is to neither China nor America, ultimately, if indeed we hold the name of Christ in high regard. So that's all I have to say. I know this was a little long. Thank you for listening all the way. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions. You can contact me in the link down below if you would like access to the letter to sign it in advance and run public. Thank you for listening. Take care. God bless.